Does it really take that many templates to build a simple child's rocking chair? So, some apologies up front here. Somehow I lost a great deal of video footage, so the video footage that I have is kind of gappy. Fortunately, I take a lot of pictures along the way to post to the forums, so I'm going to try to fill in those gaps with the pictures and try to explain those as I go along. As always, it starts out with usually milling lumber. In this case, I needed some templates first. As usual, I started over in SketchUp just to give me some basic ideas and thoughts that were in my head at the time. I use these in the shop all the time. Then I went and added some dimensions so that I could go start creating some of the templates I knew I was going to need to build this chair. The lumber of choice for this project is quarter sawn white oak, and I know it doesn't show up, but the ray fleck in this quarter sawn white oak is just excellent. I'm starting here with the back leg template, and I've already located for the mortise in the top for the crest rail on this template, and just getting these transferred over to the wood. I'll transfer both the back legs and the front legs over to the lumber. Because these rear legs are an odd shape, I started off roughing them out of the lumber first at the bandsaw before milling. I'll be cutting out the two front legs as one piece, just so that it's long enough to go through my equipment, and I'll separate them in half later. And then it was off to the joiner to get one side flat, and then over to the planer to get the other side flat. So next up, I'm using blue tape and CA glue to attach the template to the back legs. I'll be taking this over to the router table to flush trim to the template I created earlier. This particular step of flush trimming always makes me a little bit nervous. Now, I do have the safety pin in, but that's still a lot of bit sticking out of the table. Fortunately, I cut close enough to the lines so that I just wasn't removing a lot of material. I went slow and easy, and everything came out just fine. From there, it was over to the hollow chisel mortiser to go ahead and get the mortise for the crest rail at the top of the legs. With a square blank cut to the final size of the crest rail, I took it over to the table saw to hog out the material for the tenon that I would need for the mortises we just cut. In hindsight, I should have probably put the dado stack in. It would have meant much faster. And here you see on the bottom of the crest rail, there's a mortise cut to accept the backrest on the chair. This was cut at the hollow chisel mortiser in exactly the same setting that I used for the setup on the legs. With the tenons fitting the mortises properly, I then went back to the bandsaw just to give this crest rail a little bit of shape. And here you can see a good picture of the first dry fit of the crest rail that's rough shaped and ready to go. To further refine the shape of the crest rail, I used a combination of my power carver as well as some sanders. And I may still do more of that yet, but I did want a little bit more refinement to the crest rail. Unfortunately, this is where I lost most of my video footage, so we're going to jump around here a little bit, and I'll try to explain things with some pictures as we go. I'm using the domino to create the mortises for the seat rails, which will tie the front and the back legs together. I also cut the backrest and put the tenon in it the same way that I did for the crest rail, and then rough shaped it here at the bandsaw. So what I failed to mention in the front of this video is the chair I'm building is actually a prototype for a chair my good friend Richard asked me to help him build for his granddaughter. The pictures you're seeing here are just all the steps that I just did, but on his chair. What took me about a day and a half to create templates and build the prototype chair and all that good stuff only took this man about 4.5 hours to reproduce in the shop. To make the rockers, I started with thin strips of white oak and a little piece of padauk for a splash of color. I then got all these clamped up in a bent lamination form and then took them to the joiner to get the one side flat, and then over to the table saw to get the other side parallel with the first side. So next up is just a little bit of shaping here on the front legs. If you remember back to the drawing, none of this was in my original drawing, so this is just me looking at the piece and seeing where I can remove some stock to give it a little better look, if you will. I go ahead and cut these at the bandsaw and clean them up at the spindle sander, as well as use some hand sanding and whatnot. And then we'll get it all put back together and have a look and see if I need to take some more off or if I've taken enough for now. I also went ahead and cut some tapers on the back legs. So the insides have a short taper to get to where the seat rails are, and the outsides I can pretty much run those as long as I want, and I went most of the way up but not all the way up. Again, it was just what looked good to my eye at the time I was doing it. And then we'll put it together and have a look and see if I need to take more again. And here I'm just thinning out the armrests, again removing the bulk of the stock. There'll still be a lot more shaping later. And that takes us to where the chair is currently at, waiting for Richard to arrive tomorrow when we catch his chair up to this location. And with the crest rail back in the shop, I can finally get around to doing this glue up. For the remainder of this video, you'll see Richard in and out of the picture as well. He was in the shop with me on this particular day getting his chair back up to where mine is. And once again, I had to create another template for the seat pattern, and here I'm just marking that out on my seat blank so I can get that cut over at the bandsaw. I cut as close to the lines as I could, but admittedly I had to make a few trips back and forth and even had to get a couple of rasps out just to make this seat blank fit just right on the frame. With the seat fitting correctly, I added some general lines in there so I could start scooping out the seat. This is I believe it's called the Holy Galahad wheel, made by Kutzall, I do believe. And just scooping out the seat, and I did leave an area in the middle for like a small pommel. It's not going to be very pronounced in this thin seat, but it is there. Then it was off to the sander to get rid of all of those carving marks. I started with 80 grit and I worked all the way up through 180 grit to get this all smoothed out and looking the way I wanted it to look. I will say that all this sculpting is very time consuming, so this all took me a few hours to get it looking the way I wanted it to look. To mount the seat, I drilled some oversized holes in the frame. I drilled them oversized to allow for wood movement in the seat. Then I installed the seat and drove the screws from the bottom side, making sure to do the final tighten by hand, so I didn't break the screws off or have any issues in this hardwood. And next I spent another couple hours just softening all the edges here with a 1/4 inch roundover bit and a trim router. But I also did a lot of hand sanding and softening of the corners and whatnot at this stage, kind of getting it ready for finish. Installing the arms is really pretty straightforward. I use the domino in the back and then a single screw down into the top of the leg for the front that will be plugged later with a Paduk plug to kind of match that splash of color that I put in the rocker earlier. Next up was trimming the legs to their final length and also the correct angle to meet up with the rockers. I cut these by hand, but again it took a few times back and forth with a rasp and a sander to get these to fit just right. They're mounted from the underside using screws and then plugged with the Paduk plug again and sanded smooth. I'd been looking forward to the finish on this one for a while, mainly because I was going to use something a little new for me. I've used Rubio before, but never Rubio white, and that's what I chose for this one, thinking it would look good on the white oak. But there was just too much pigment in it, and it was a horrible choice for this chair. Now, I should have tested on some scrap wood first before committing this finish to this project, considering I had never used it before, but I didn't. I ended up going back with a whole bunch of the maintenance oil from Rubio, trying to thin out some of this pigment, and I thinned a lot of it out. But I will end up refinishing this chair at some point in the future. I also had to go back and re-burn all of the laser engraving by hand because it got so much pigment in it. Needless to say, this is the longest it's ever taken me to install Rubio Monocoat. In all honesty, I probably spent as much time taking it off as I did putting it on. Well, there it is, all finished up. You see I got a great deal of that white pigment out. Super fun project. I always enjoy collaborating with somebody else on a project in the shop, and Richard was a true pleasure to work with. I'm sure that there's more of these in my future, and I'll make better finish decisions on those future ones. Now that I have the templates, the next one should go fairly quick.